G'day guys, Ben Sterling here from HB Reds Racing. Today I'm going to show you how to build a diff out of a HB D817 Nitro buggy. Thanks. Alright, so we'll get started building the diff. So what we'll do is start off with the diff case. So this diff case has already been prepared and been run a few times. So if this was a brand new one, what I would do is just make sure that the top surface is smooth. And obviously there's no moulding edges from where the plastic's been released out of the mould. One way to do that is put it on a flat surface, and if there's any rock in it, then you know you've got to do either sand it lightly to make it nice and smooth, or just get a hobby knife and just trim the edges just to make sure it does sit nice and flat on there, and that way you'll know that your diff gasket will get a nice seal on it every single time. So what we'll do then is I'll use a flat blade screwdriver. I use black graphite grease, and what I'll do with that is where the metal bush is in the diff case there, where the bearing sits, I'll just put a light little smear of the black grease just around the outside of the bush where the bearing sits, and that way it allows the bearing to float on there a lot smoother. And also if you do any wet running or anything like that in the rain, it tends to not seize on there or cause any rust or anything like that. So yeah, I'll just work it around there a little bit just to make sure it slides on and off nice and easy, and also make sure there's a nice level of grease in there as well. These bearings I've used quite a bit. Every time I pull a diff apart, I'll always pull the seals off, clean it out, re-grease it, or re-oil it I should say, and then put the seals back on, and you're good to go again. The oil I use for the bearings is the 1UP Racing oil, which is through RC Maker in Australia, and through 1UP Racing in USA. That works really well. I've done a fair bit of running with it now and had no issues. Seems to work really well. So after you've got the bearing on the case with the grease, I'll then use the same grease again on the diff out drives, and as you can see on the diff out drives, you get the little groove around the inside here, which is designed to hold grease in there. And what that does is, obviously because it's rotating in a metal bush, you don't want it to heat up too much and cause drag. So every time I do an oil change, whether it's just for a testing change or something like that to try different diff oil, or I do a full rebuild on the diff or just service it, I always pull the diff out drives, always clean it, re-grease it, and install it in again, and that way you're getting a very consistent diff every time you're going to use the diff. So what I'll do is just put a little amount on the flat blade screwdriver and just feed it into the little grooves just so it's full. Make sure it's full all the way around, like so. And then I'll just use my finger just lightly and just grab the built up parts and move it towards the end of the shaft just to coat that part. And then I install it into the diff case, and the way I do that is I just hold it, and as I slide it in I spin it around, and that way you're getting an even coat all the way through the diff case. So we're all the way in. And then what we'll do is get some new O-rings for it. I've got 2 O-rings here. With the O-rings I use the much more shock slime. What that does is basically stops the O-ring from absorbing all the silicone oil and causing bind or leakage issues in the diffs. I found this one to be the best. Works quite well. So just get the O-ring, just give it a good coat in the grease all the way around, and just install that into the diff, like so. And then you get the pin and go through the side hole, just line it all the way up and center it in there like so. Then you get your little grub screw, and again I use the shock slime just to put a little smear on the threads just to help seal the screw off inside the plastic and seal it off in there. And with the screw you just want to make sure that you don't go too far in so it'll bind on the gear. You just want to make sure it's nice and flush on the inside, which that is. Wipe off any excess, and then you're ready to put your gear on. So these gears have already been used. Normally I'll put a little smear of the diff oil in there before I install them, but these ones have already been used, so they're already a nice smear of diff oil inside. So go ahead and install that in. Make sure it's seated down properly, give it a little wiggle. The shock oil, I'm building a center diff this time. I'm going to try 7,000 weight, and the diff oils and shock oils that I use is the TLR range of oils. I just find them pretty consistent and very readily available, which makes life easy. So yeah, 7,000. So what I'll do is I'll put that all the way around the outside of the bottom gear. Just give it a good feed. So basically you want it sort of about half full so far. And then you're ready to install your bevel gears. Yeah, so these I've already got assembled, so you got the washer and the gear just like normal. So put the bottom one in. Make sure it's all sit down properly in there. And then get the next one. And then I normally rotate it around, make sure they're in. Rotate them 180 degrees, and then just let the oil evaporate out of there, or rise up out of there. So then basically repeat the same procedure with the spur gears, what we just did on the diff case. So again, a little bit of black grease around the part where the bearing sits on. Like that. Again, cleaned, re-oiled bearing. I use the Plague ceramic V2 bearings. So that's all set on there now. And then again with the diff out drive through in the groove. Just want to get a bit of black graphite grease. Work that in there. Like I said, I do this every time I change diff oils. Every time the diff's apart, I get into the habit of making sure I pull the diff out drives out and re-grease them and clean them. And that way you know every time you're running your diffs, they're always going to be the exact same. There's not going to be any binding due to heat or anything in the metals. So twist it as you're spinning it in, and it's in there ready to go. And again with the O-ring, bit of the O-ring grease. Just want to make sure it's a good coating of it in there. And I always run my finger around, then push it through, and it should always stay in there. And you pin. Rotate that one around. And then with the gaskets, this time I'll put a new gasket in, but with the Hot Bodies diffs, normally the gaskets will last around 2 to 3 oil changes before they start soaking up all the silicone oil and start compacting down too far, so it ends up causing diff bind. So yeah, I'll always do around 2 to 3 diff oil changes and then change the gasket. So I'll show you that. So I've got a new gasket here. So what I do with a new gasket is I use the diff seal grease from Kyosho. It's actually a really good grease for the gaskets. It adds a good coating on them, so it actually makes them last longer, so the silicone oil doesn't absorb into them as fast and they start dripping down into the diff case. So I normally put a good helping onto my finger like that, rub my finger and my thumb together, and then basically work it all the way around the diff gasket just until it's a nice even smooth coating around the outside. And then once I've done that, just line up the holes inside the spur gear or the diff crown gear, make sure it's all seated in properly, and then that's your spur gear ready to go on. So we'll check back in a couple of seconds once this diff's had all the air release out of it. Okay, so we've allowed for all the air to release out of there now, so we'll go and put the top gear on. So what I try and do is normally do it in like a cross shape drop him on there, and then always rotate it 45 degrees or 90 degrees depending where it's at, so the cross pin is always opposite to the screw holes. And then we can go ahead and put the top cut part on to the diff. So make sure it's crossed up the same way, so pin crossways with the screw holes. Drop them on top, line up the holes, and then make sure the speed is pushed down nice and tight on top of the diff casing so it gets a nice seal. Then when you're screwing in, you always do the opposite, so you start from one, then you do the opposite to that one. Then I go ahead and tighten those two down, nice and firm. And then you can do the opposite too. And you can just go around, just retweak them all, make sure they're all pulled down nice and even and tight. Make sure your diff's nice and smooth. That is beautiful. As smooth as every time. And you go and get a white texture, and then just make sure you write on it what weight diff oil you got in there. So I'm running 7. So 7K, and we're done. And that's how you build a hot bodies diff. Any questions, feel free to comment on this post and we'll be more than happy to help. Thanks.